In this video, I'm going to go over stereo illumination and optics on a Leica M205 FCA with a motorized TL5000 base. So let's start with our top light, our goosenecks, and these are referred to as the SLI light. You can see that within LASX, I can adjust the intensity of the light. I can also go into the option of turning one side off or on and then the other side. If you have a dome light or another top light like this, we can also adjust it using these settings. The next set of settings I'm going to show you is the transmitted lights. First is bright field. Bright field is indicated by BF, and similar to the goosenecks, we can adjust the intensity as well as the aperture. This auto button closes the aperture for very high contrast imaging. So the next transmitted light method I want to talk about is Roderman Contrast. I've saved a user setting, but you can easily also just click the RC button under Scene. So Roderman Contrast is very similar to DIC. When you move this balance back and forth, it creates a shadow-like effect very similar to when you move the DIC prism on its bias. So let's zoom in a little bit, and you can see that as I move the balance from one side to the other, the shadow changes sides as well. And again, when I click this auto button, it increases the contrast of the image. The last transmitted light method here is dark field, and that is not very well shown by this sample, but I just wanted to show you how it works. So dark field works by closing the aperture all the way and then using oblique illumination on the sample. Let's move on to fluorescence. So we can turn the fluorescence light source on and off by clicking that IL light button. And I've loaded a fluorescent user setting, which I'm using on this fern. And now I'm just focusing on my sample. So you would take this image how you would normally in LASX with fluorescence imaging, but the one thing I wanted to point out was the iris control here on the M205 FCA, which is coded, meaning I'm actually closing the iris diaphragm at the front of the optic on the microscope. On a M205 FA, you would be able to do this through the software. But notice as I'm closing the iris diaphragm, how much dimmer the image gets. So you're going to have to trust me that I was closing the iris diaphragm, and you can see the intensity going way down and then coming back up again as you watch this bar on the left, because right now I have it on auto scale, so you can't really tell as much. The other thing I wanted to point out is that as I open and close this iris diaphragm, you can see that the number behind the magnification, which is the numerical aperture, that increases or decreases depending on whether it's open or closed. The general rule of thumb in microscopy is that the higher the numerical aperture, the higher resolution your image, as well as the brighter your image. So it's always good to have this really high especially for fluorescence imaging. So to demonstrate how this iris diaphragm and numerical aperture affects your Z resolution, I'm going to go ahead and set up a Z stack. You can see that with my diaphragm all the way open, the number of steps is 13 for a step size of 22, and then as I open the diaphragm, it goes down to 2 steps at 269 microns. So the only time you'd want to have that iris diaphragm all the way closed is when you want to have a larger Z area in focus.